right, I admit it, I was wrong. If you've been following my 2007 Chevy Tahoe LTZ, you'll know that when I bought it, they had replaced the rear shocks in this before I had purchased it. And that's because it had active suspension in the rear, and just like every Chevy Tahoe LTZ of this generation, the active suspension had failed and thrown an error light. Now, they did replace that and I thought I was done. Now, when I had purchased this Tahoe, I had heard a sound on the front, which I knew was probably a front strut. And I went ahead and negotiated that into the price. However, when I had the dealership quote out replacing the front suspension, I had them quote it out as a passive suspension because that's what I thought was in the front, and they quoted it out about $700, and I negotiated that into the price of purchasing this Tahoe. Now, of course, here we are a year and a half later, and it's time to replace the suspension. It has officially gone out. It rides really, really rough. It's not a great experience, and it bounces every time I go over a bump and kind of makes you seasick, honestly. So what I did is I went into my local Les Schwab and I'm like, hey, can you guys replace my passive suspension? They're like, yeah, sure. So they quoted it out and I took it in. Well, I got a phone call before I could get home from dropping it off, and they let me know it's not passive suspension in the front and it's active suspension, and it's going to cost me 3 to 4 times the amount it would be to replace it as a passive suspension. And so we're talking thousands of dollars. So as you can imagine, I was pretty bummed about that because I didn't want to spend thousands of dollars on an issue I had not negotiated thousands of dollars to replace. And to be completely honest with you, I didn't really want to put another active suspension in this Tahoe. I knew it just probably would fail again. So just like the rear suspension, I went ahead and did some searching for a passive suspension conversion kit for the Chevy Tahoe in the front end. And I stumbled upon Strutmasters. And of course, as an influencer, I reached out to them to see if they'd be interested in sending out a unit for free to let you guys know if it's a good solution for this. Now, at the time of filming this, I obviously have not installed it yet. It is still an issue. So let's go ahead and get it out, and I'm going to show you guys what it's all about. All right, and here it is. This thing is pretty heavy. Let's see what we have. Now, this theoretically should be a full suspension. So basically you have both the strut arm and you're going to have the coil springs on the outside, so it should just be plug and play. And then there also should be some electronic cables to basically trick the system into believing that it still has an air ride suspension, but it doesn't. It's funny, I actually still hear the air compressor kicking on every once in a while, trying to pump up the rear, which is not connected, and I'm sure that's because it has the same thing. So let's open it up. All right, first thing, these are going to be some of your hardware for installation, and here it is. Here's the front struts. You have the coils and everything. Now, let me say really quick, I'm gonna put this back in. Not only does this future-proof your Tahoe in the fact that you're not gonna have an air ride suspension that fails on you all the time, but it's also considerably cheaper. This whole kit is a little under $500 before tax. And I was quoted somewhere over, I think, $2,000 to do the same job with the active suspension in the front. So if you're looking for a cheaper way to do this and to be able to maintain it cheaper moving forward, a passive suspension is a really good choice. All right, so let's throw this back into the back of the Tahoe, and I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit more about it. Now, I'm not going to pretend that I'm the one going to install this, because I'm not. I actually am not a super good mechanic, and I have a mechanic that's helped me out a ton in the past that's going to be throwing these on for me, and we're going to catch up with them later after this is installed. Now, just in case you landed on this video and you just so happen to have a vehicle that has an air ride suspension and you want to convert it for cheaper into a passive suspension, I do have a link down in the description for you if you want to check out and see if Strutmasters has it for you, as a thank you for them gifting it to me, but also it just is a really cool setup. Now, I personally haven't had these installed yet. So far, I've been impressed by the company, but we'll check out later in the video if it works and fixes my issue, along with making it a better ride overall. So stay tuned for that. I'm gonna go ahead and drop these off tomorrow, and we'll catch up later to see if it fixed everything. And we're back. So it's actually been about a month since that last clip you guys watched, but since then I did have the struts installed. As you can see, there is the old one right there. We'll take a closer look at that air ride suspension in a second, but the extra time has allowed me to spend a little bit more time with the new struts. We're gonna get into that just now. All right, and here we are. You can see behind here is the new strut right there, going all the way up. So it supposedly went in really well. My mechanic said it was an easy install, wasn't too big of a deal. It was just a quick adapter. You can kind of see up in there that they had to switch out and plug into, basically tricking the system into thinking it still has air ride suspension. I do hear the air ride going on every once in a while, and it's all installed. And just in case you guys are wondering, here is the air ride suspension component right here. You can see kind of the electronics right there, and basically that is what has been adapted to trick the system into thinking it has air ride suspension. But now it has full passive suspension in the front, and it is pretty nice because that was so much cheaper to do than replacing a full air ride suspension. So let's go ahead and talk about what I do like and I don't like. All right, so let's go ahead and start off with the things that I do like about this new suspension. Now, first things is really it comes down to cost. So first off comes down to cost in the initial purchase of this. So this passive suspension, I think was $500 or $600 or so to get all of the components, and then it was a couple $100 to get my mechanic to install it. And so it was super cheap to get fixed initially, and it went over very, very well. However, it's also going to come into future replacements of this as well. Once this passive suspension goes out someday, all you have to do is replace it with the same component again, and that's really nice because it starts compounding on itself over the years, because instead of spending, I think I was quoted between $2,100 and $3,000 to replace the active suspension in this vehicle, the passive suspension is much cheaper. Other cool thing about this kit itself is it does come with all the electronic to trick the system into thinking it still has the active suspension, so I don't have any error lights or anything like that from switching it over, which if you were to put in a normal strut system, it wouldn't come with that, and you'd be running into error lights, and I really appreciate that it came with that, and it was a simple system to do. Otherwise, I'd be spending more with my mechanic to fix that. The number two thing outside of cost that I really appreciate about this system comes down to how quickly it shipped. I really appreciated how quickly they shipped this thing out. I think they had it to me within a week of me discussing it with them. And as far as I'm aware, they put me in as a normal order. I don't think they rushed anything, and so that was really nice. And the number three thing is it was the correct part and it was not damaged. I have been in the automotive world for a long time. I've worked at retail stores for parts. I worked for drivetrain and all that kind of stuff. And one of the biggest issues I run into is wrong parts being shipped out. And I super appreciate Strutmasters for shipping out the right part the first time. Product worked really, really well. There's only so many things I can say about it. In the pros side of things, it did exactly what they said it would. It shipped quickly. I appreciate everything that they did. They even sent me a bunch of stickers that I can put on my guitar case, and that is amazing. I really appreciate companies that do stick to what they offer. I was super, super worried to come in as a wrong part, and it didn't. And so here we are, because I mean, honestly, I was going to have this replaced with another active suspension, and I gave VINs, I gave all that kind of stuff to a different shop that was going to install it. And of course it came in wrong. They didn't account for it having an active suspension in the front. And so it was just a pain, and Strutmasters, you know, they just kind of held up to what they said they would. So now that leads me to the downsides of the suspension. And there really is only one real downside, is that you're losing the active suspension. Now the active suspension is incredibly expensive to fix, but it does ride nicer. I did find a bit of a downgrade in ride quality when I switched over to this passive suspension. I don't think it's really a downside of Strutmasters themselves. However, if you're like me and switching from an active and air ride suspension over to a passive suspension, you probably are going to lose a little bit of that ride quality. You feel a little bit more in the bumps. So I was a bit bummed about that. However, considering I'm saving thousands of dollars doing it this way, I can definitely get past a little bit extra bumps in the road. And so I have to say, who should buy this? Someone who not only wants to save money on their Tahoe like this or other vehicle that has an active suspension, but also somebody who might want to make it a little bit more reliable. I see these active suspensions going out all the time in these LTZs. Also the GMC Yukon Denali's have the same suspension, and going into Escalades and all the different GMT 900 platform vehicles. It's just a serious issue in these, and this is going to be a much more reliable way of having suspension in this vehicle with little to no issues. It's fixed all of my problems other than, you know, maybe a little bit extra bumpy around the bumps. But that's about it. And if you're somebody who wants to purchase this, again, I do have a link down in the description and the top comment. It is a paid link, and I do get a commission if you guys do decide to get it. And if you like this glare on my forehead, make sure to subscribe and like this video as it helps me out in the algorithm.